Yeah, that's a great question. So I always say that there are kind of two versions of motivation. There's
Mhm.
motivation as like an emotion,
Right.
which is what we kind of identify with, is like that feeling to go forward. And then there's kind of the more technical version of motivation, which is that motivation is just an internal calculator that you have that
Mhm.
decides what the most important thing to do is. So the easiest way to simplify that, whatever you're doing right now is always the thing you're most motivated to do. And we can manipulate that by getting you to think about certain things, by doing certain things to you. We have a calculator that we are feeding information. And
Mhm.
that information can be conscious, it can be unconscious, it can come from the environment, it can come from within. Motivation is both an emotion, but it's also like an internal formula that determines
Mhm.
what you should be doing.
Mhm.
People with ADHD have a really unique relationship with motivation, but fundamentally their calculator kind of works the same way as everything else.
Hey there, Vibers. Welcome to the Vibe with Kai podcast, where we keep it real, we keep it relatable, and we keep it a little bit funny as we dive into all things mental health, ADHD, and introversion. My name is Kai. I'm your host, and each week we're going to tackle life struggles with honesty, humor, and a whole lot of heart. So whether you're here for practical advice or a little validation or just a laugh about what life is like as an adult in today's world, listen, you are in the right place. We are not about toxic positivity here. We are all about being genuine to each other and to ourselves. And we're talking about real things. And we want to encourage each other and remind you that you are not alone. With that said, my friends, sit back, relax, and let's vibe through this together and enjoy today's episode of the Vibe with Kai podcast.
What's going on, Vibers? Welcome to another episode of the Vibe with Kai podcast. It's your boy Kai here. In today's episode, we're diving into a topic that hits close to home for a lot of us, ADHD and introversion. It is literally my entire platform talking about ADHD and introversion. And if you ever felt like your brain was running 5 marathons at once while also desperately just needing space, needing to take some time away, then this episode is definitely for you. And to help us unpack all of this, I'm joined by Justin Leff, the mastermind behind Solilium Behavioral Awareness Coaching. Justin is a behavioral awareness coach who specializes in helping people bridge the gap between what they want to do and what they actually end up doing. If that sounds familiar, I'm right there in the same boat with you. He works with people struggling with motivation, procrastination, burnout, and of course, ADHD. And his approach blends psychology-backed strategies with real-life solutions. And I promise this is not your typical just try harder advice, which is probably one of my biggest pet peeves. It's a lot deeper than that. We'll talk about why ADHD and introversion can feel like a confusion mix, how to break through self-sabotage, and what really works when it comes to motivation. Plus, Justin will share some simple, realistic ways to make life easier for our wonderfully overcomplicated ADHD brains. With that said, I want to welcome our guest, Justin. What's going on, my friend? Hello, hello.
Yeah, it was a really generous intro. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It's funny. We were talking right before we were recording, and usually anytime I talk to somebody, either they are, because I talk with people like around the world. I'm very fortunate to talk with people, and usually they're either in my time zone or like maybe like West Coast, so they're maybe like 3 hours behind, or maybe they're like in Europe, so they're maybe like 5 or 6 hours ahead. But I've never spoken with somebody that is just 1 hour ahead of me, like just like 1 hour. So this is unique for me. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, it's almost pretentious, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I moved here like in my 20s, so I didn't even know this time zone existed until I moved here. I was in Toronto most of my life.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So far East Coast that I guess we need our own little special time zone.
I see that. Yeah. It's what fun fact, I've traveled to many places. I've never been to Canada. I've never been to Canada. I need to make it there.
I mean, there's some really like beautiful geography in Canada for sure.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the US does as well. So
I need to make it there.
I'm not saying I don't love my country, but I do understand why it's not like a prime destination point for a lot of people.
That's fair. I've met I have a lot of friends that are in like Toronto, and like I'm friends with the GM of the Toronto Raptors, and so like anytime I like talk to them, I'm like, I gotta make it up there just at least to visit my friends. So I need to I need to make it up there.
Yeah.
But
I mean, Canada and the US in a lot of ways feel so similar that there's not like this big urge. If I go to Italy, it's very distinct.
Me too. Justin, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to sit and record with us. If you don't mind, for there's going to be people that are listening to this, obviously that aren't familiar with you and what you do and your story. What led you to pursue behavioral awareness coaching, and how did Solilium come to life?
It was actually it was a very late and sort of sudden career change for me. Because, my entire life, I've always felt like I was really good at reading people and really good at sort of making connections. But that doesn't sound like a marketable skill, right? Like that's just, I'm smart. That just, you know what I mean? And so my entire life, I sort of never really thought that was something I could do. My world was always going to be about tech or administration or something like that. And then a random innocent conversation with somebody just sort of sparked in this idea that I would actually be good at helping people. And then I started looking at like, how do you provide one-on-one support? And I was like, okay, well, I don't really like, not that I don't like therapy, but I didn't want to do therapy. And so, I decided that I was going to try and do something that was a little bit more constructive and more like broad in psychology, which is just helping people with like the broader theories of like motivation, procrastination, and behavioral control in general. And I don't know, it was just, I think the main reason why I do this is because a lot of people say, oh, I love helping people. And I care about my clients, but honestly, I just love looking at the human mind as a puzzle. I just like doing this, and I have infinite energy for it, which is right on topic for like, what we're about to go into with introversion and stuff. Like when I do this, I get energy out of it. I'm desperately extroverted in this sense. So I don't know, just this random realization that, hey, this thing that people have been telling me I'm good at my whole life is something that I can actually, back up with an education and do for a living. And the realization that I never get drained doing this. I could work, 80 hours a week and be fine. So I don't know, just it was just a sudden but very smart and correct career pivot for me.
Right. And I know that we were kind of like joking about this earlier about like how similar the United States and Canada is, geographically and even culturally at time. With that said, do you ever find any cultural differences between the US and Canada when it comes to mental health and ADHD and introversion? Do you, like, with the amount of people that you talk to, do you find any differences between the two ever?
I don't think so, because I mean, the US and the Canada definitely have different cultures and different mental health situations, right? But people come to me because they identify with particular pain points or goals. And so I'm kind of getting the same demographics from both countries.
Sure.
The only real thing that I would say is like kind of a little bit more specifically American is I've met politics is a lot more of an explicit, like obvious source of people's disdain in the US. Like
what? What are you talking about, Justin? I don't know what you're referring to.
No, I mean, and it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. Like in the US, the political situation is pretty polarized right now. So like, it's kind of funny how often it's explicitly mentioned as something that's like upsetting people. And in Canada, it's, people still struggle with shit. Everybody's still upset about the economy and stuff like that. But it's less blaringly on top. It's like, this stresses me out when I think about it.
Right. That's fair. It's funny because I get a chance to talk with a lot of, coaches and therapists and all of that. It's been a very educational thing. And one of the questions that I get in my comments sometimes whenever I like post up a clip is what is a coach? Like what is the difference between like a coach and a therapist and a psychologist and all that? So like, if you don't mind, could you just explain what it is that you do as a behavioral coach that helps people out every day in regards to ADHD?
Yeah. So you can think of the word coaching as just helping to improve performance at.
Right.
So if I'm a basketball coach, I'm helping you perform at basketball better. If I'm a behavioral awareness coach, I'm helping you perform better at understanding your behavior and how you should respond to it when you can identify with it. Like a really big key thing in what I do is just self-awareness, because like, I'm very against this whole like top-down solution. Just do this one thing. This is the ultimate, motivation hack. Like, I don't believe in that. I don't think it's good psychology.
Neither do I.
So for me, it's all about really digging into people's thought and behavioral patterns in a way where we know what's getting in the way of them and what they want to do, so that we can intercept it with the correct tools. So, the sort of strategies isn't built into the title, but, the title can only be so long. So what I try and make it about is that I'm just trying to get you good at recognizing why you're doing what you're doing.
Right.
And I suppose like at the core of how I run my practice is I look at everything as motivated. I like when someone comes in and they say, oh, my brain is broken, or I just do this, like, in my opinion, you're wrong. Like we all do, everything we do is motivated. We just can't quite access why yet. And once we
right,
figure that out, we can start using actual psychology tools to intercept on that.
right.
So I'm helping you
Right.
perform at getting better at knowing what you're doing so that you can, fix it in the way you want to.
Right. And you do that with a lot of different things, like I know we're talking a lot about like ADHD, but anxiety, self-esteem, burnout, like all those types of things. You are able to help coach people through a lot of those things. Was there a personal experience that made you realize that you want to help out with these things specifically?
Yeah, I hope this doesn't sound too pretentious, but I just feel like I've had pretty good mental health my whole life. And what I mean by that is not that I haven't been depressed, but that I think of mental health as navigating the environment, right? So I think of it like I always compare it to physical health.
Right.
The more physically fit you are, the more situations you can survive. And if there's a bunch of lions in the room with me, the more fit I am, the more lions I can outrun, right? The more mentally well I am, the more situations I can navigate myself through.
Right.
So I've always had a really good ability to sort of just be calm and view the environment in front of me and take stock of what's available and just make decisions based on that. Like when something's out of my control, I have the superpower to just not care about it at all.
What's that like?
So,
teach me your ways, Justin.
I guess it's pretty good. I mean, I've been known a different life, right?
Right.
But funny, like even my mom said to that. She said that's always been your superpower, is that when something you can't control something, you just let it go. And I don't know. So I guess I've always been a little bit of like counsel for people in my life, and so just sort of noticing that people struggle with patterns that I feel like I've been good at naturally navigating.
Right.
Made me realize, okay, if I can back this with the right psychology education, I think I can actually help people.
Sure. Though I am going to question your mental health if I find you in a room full of like wild animals. I'm gonna be like, why did you put yourself in that in that situation in the first place, Justin? There's a bunch of lions and tigers.
It's actually so funny you say that, because I always say to my friends that I think if I die early, it's going to be because I want to pet the tiger too badly. Like I'm too fascinated by wild animals.
Yeah, that's fair. But I get it.
I'm making a conscious decision there, so it's okay.
That's fair. No, I got you. I want to get into like defining some behavioral awareness things here and its connection to ADHD and introversion. For those of the people that are listening that are new to behavioral awareness and the coaching that you do, how does that resonate with an ADHD introvert? Because I know like our topic today is specifically ADHD and introversion. So when it comes to behavioral awareness coaching, how can you help with ADHD introverts?
Well, first off, I study ADHD itself. Like a lot of the strategies I use are straight up like ADHD self-regulation, executive functioning theories. So like I'm really familiar with ADHD literature and strategies as well.
Right.
I think the main reason, I think one of the things that a lot of clients I have with ADHD really identify with is I kind of think that good ADHD strategy has to be holistic. And what I mean by that is because ADHD is something that affects your attention and your motivation, and all of these other executive functioning issues. And these are kind of the first casualties in almost any mental illness, right? Like if you have depression or if you have anxiety, it's going to affect your attention, it's going to affect your focus, it's going to affect your motivation just as well. So will not having a mental illness. Like motivation isn't a concept that only applies to people with ADHD. So something that's really important when you're working with people on ADHD is you have to help them separate what about your situation is owed to your ADHD versus what about this is just basic motivational work.
Right.
And so having a really sort of holistic, I guess, framework where I'm familiar with motivation and anxiety and discipline and self-regulation in a way that is both specific to ADHD and not specific ADHD means that we're not just treating your disorder like a prisoner, like someone that's keeping you prisoner, right? Because we want to be able to separate these things and just sort of have you think about it a lot more adaptively rather than I have ADHD and because of that I have motivational issues, because it makes it worse for sure, but we can also really pull back and ask ourselves, what about your motivation or your attention issues are ADHD specific? And that's like a really complicated web. So I think the behavioral awareness model that I use is really good for helping focus on all of these things in a way that isn't so trapped by the ADHD concept, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. And I feel as though a lot of introverts with ADHD, a lot of us, we struggle with I guess conflicting desires, right? Like wanting to be social but also needing solitude, right? How
Mhm.
can you help people untangle those contradictions sometimes?
I think and this is kind of really broad language that you can apply to a lot of
Yeah,
things, right?
yeah,
Is to
mm-hmm.
replace the word but or the word or with the word and. Because
Mm.
usually we have this idea that we say, okay, well, I'm introverted, but I want to be social. And I
Right.
think it's a lot healthier
Mm-hmm.
to say, I'm introverted and I want to be social.
Mm-hmm.
Because these two things can coexist
Yes.
together,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's like a really good sort of like broad way to start with it, is to acknowledge that both of
Mm-hmm.
these things are true at the same time.
Yes.
And so you need to think about like what things are required in order to maintain these two things together. Because we're not trying to
Mm-hmm.
deny the fact that you're introverted, but we're also trying to acknowledge that you have social needs that you want to meet.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that's probably like a lot of times people will because I tell like I people think I'm crazy, and I know you might even disagree with this as well. I am not a big fan of like the terms like introverted extrovert or extroverted introvert, mainly because I feel as though like you can still be an introvert and still be social. Like it doesn't, like I think there's a lot of misconceptions around introversion, so people think, okay, well, I for example, I like hanging out with my friends, but I also like that recharge time alone. So people are like, oh, well, you're an introvert extrovert. I'm like, no, I'm an introvert that just happens to like hanging out with my friends. And so like I don't consider myself an extrovert really at any point, just because I have the ability to talk to people or have the ability to have conversations, or I'm not shy, I'm not socially anxious or anything like that. And I think sometimes people view me as like a introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert, and like that's just not how I view myself. I feel as though I'm just an introvert that just likes to have conversations with people. What are your thoughts on like that term, introvert extrovert, extrovert introvert?
I actually agree with you pretty radically on this.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
fact, I feel like there isn't, we use the words introversion, extroversion because they're actually very useful words. Like when I say
Mm-hmm.
those words, you know exactly what I'm meaning. Like that's language
Right,
and that's working.
right.
But I don't think there's a very clear idea in psychology about like being an introvert isn't some specific cluster of genetics that exist in your head, right? We're
Yeah.
describing like a relationship you have with life. And
Yes.
so my feeling on it, and what I feel like kind of psychology leads to when you look at all like the surrounding ideas that would make up introversion, extroversion,
Mm-hmm.
is that it's actually way more situation specific than people give it credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Because we like labels a lot, and we tend to think
Mm-hmm.
I'm introverted or I'm extroverted, and I am very intentional about trying to use labels as minimal as possible. So I to my clients, I never say you have depression or you have anxiety or you have stress. I say you are having an anxious moment, you are having depressive.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm really all about using adjectives over nouns or descriptors.
Ooh, I like that. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so when I look at extroversion and introversion, I think they're really useful terms, but I also think that they're situation specific, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I feel
Mm-hmm.
like the kind of psychology suggests about it.
Right,
And that's not
right.
how we identify with it socially, but that's what I feel
Mm-hmm.
like is a healthier way to look at it, because it puts you more in control of
Right,
like what kind of boxes your introversion or your extroversion puts you in.
right, right. Do you feel as though subconsciously we as introverts and ADHDers, do you feel as though we self-sabotage sometimes in order to fit in with what other people think about us? Do you feel like that self-sabotage comes into play in our daily lives?
In terms of like the effects of feeling introverted, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, like because I feel as though, and I'll give some more context here. I feel as though sometimes, like, because we were just talking about how people view, what introversion is, for example, right? What they think it
Mhm.
is. And sometimes people will, I guess, mask their introversion in order to fit in with what they think they should be, right? And as a result, they might self-sabotage some of their own happiness or needs or whatever. Do you find that's a common thing that happens with people, that they'll kind of like self-sabotage in order to fit in, or to fit this mold that they think, like this label that they think they're supposed to be, or that people think they are?
Yeah, I really do think so.
Mm.
if you walk into a room and you go, okay, I'm introverted, so every second I spend in this room, I'm going to be draining my social energy. So all I need to do is find the kind of behavior that makes me survive this performance as well as I can. Then you are self-sabotaging yourself. And the reason I think you're doing that is because, like, basically the one sort of mental battery that we all have is kind of this need to control ourselves.
Yeah.
And so if you're thinking deliberately about what you're doing and what you should be saying, instead of just letting yourself kind of act naturally, you're going to drain yourself quicker. So if you walk into this room with this idea that, okay, I need to get ready to put on my extroverted performance, you're immediately putting your mind into this mode where it goes, okay, we have to do something intentionally and self-regulate and act against our instincts. And so you're setting it up to use that energy, and really importantly, to be aware that you're using that energy. A good analogy for this would be like, you're way happier spending your money if you don't realize that you're like, we're happy. Everybody spends like 80% of their paycheck on payday, right? And then the rest of the week we space it out. And if you
don't remind me, Justin, don't remind me.
And if you thought that your bank account was full, so like the very end of the week, you would spend a lot more recklessly, right? So just sort of having this belief that I have a budget that I need to live by makes you a lot more deliberate and careful about how you spend your money.
Right.
So like when you're aware that you're spending money recklessly, you start setting up like these conservational goals for yourself. And so your body will sort of like prematurely go into these periods of exhaustion is what can happen. Like it's called like rest in psychology, which is basically like if you're anticipating the need to conserve resources, which means like if you're anticipating that you need to recover and go to a safe, like quiet space and recover from your introverted tendencies, then you're going to wear yourself out quicker because you're more aware that that's something that you have to do. Right. So there's almost this benefit to being a bit reckless with our mental energy.
Right. And I then that actually kind of leads directly into one of the questions that I had for you, which is in regards to, I mean, one of the biggest challenges that a lot of us face, and this can I think this can fall in line with the self-sabotage type of action, is like the procrastination side of it. It's a massive challenge for a lot of us. What I don't know how to phrase it, but like, what can people do about, like, I always feel as though procrastination is like a bad word to use because it's not like I'm intentionally not, doing something, or I'm purposefully, refusing to do this task or whatever. It's just harder sometimes to like really push that start button to get something going. And I think it's a big challenge for a lot of us ADHDers, but I also think it's a big misunderstanding. And I think it can result in self-sabotage in a way. Do you talk to people about procrastination or things similar to procrastination and executive, functioning a lot? Is that a thing that you see a lot with adults that with ADHD?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one, I think procrastination's on the rise just because it's a natural consequence of like mental health issues. It's made way easier when you're surrounded by like phones and computers all day. But I think really importantly that something that I've noticed, like this isn't coming from any research, but I just feel really strongly about this. Procrastination is how we are identifying with issues more and more. Because if you have, like, what procrastination really is this intense habit or like tendency to avoid things that you ought to be doing, right? You could do that with alcohol. You could do it with gambling. You could do it with anything, right? So you could almost, like, when procrastination is chronic and constant, it's almost akin to an addiction.
Right.
But it's really like, if you have alcoholism or if you have any kind of addiction, usually there's a sign that there's something deeper going on there, right? So we're identifying more with procrastination. When people are like sabotaging their lives and letting years of their life go by and they're not doing anything, if they're drinking alcohol, it's really obvious that you have an alcohol problem. If you're procrastinating, it feels like a quirky issue and it's frustrating you, right? Nobody's like, and people aren't frustrated in the same way that they would be with other issues. So I think what's interesting about procrastination, it is more and more becoming the thing that we identify with as the thing that gets between us and where we want to go. It's not like this little like quirk that we're dealing with that, we could be a little bit more productive.
Sure.
And because it's so vague, it's also it's kind of better at hiding the core issues, I find. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I agree with you. Like, nobody chooses to be addicted to anything. Nobody makes these like terrible, unhealthy choices for them. But procrastination feels so innocent on the surface because on a day-to-day moment, it's just looking at your phone a little bit too much that it's like we're kind of identifying that it's the issue, but not identifying that it's the issue at the same time. That's what I've kind of noticed, especially in like coaching clients. It's like a lot of people come to me, they're like, oh, I procrastinate all this like too much. And we're like, okay, your life is like, you need help in a lot of different ways. Like, your life needs a lot of support in a lot of different areas. You don't just have a random procrastination gene, right? Like, this makes sense for you because your life is hard right now. Right.
Yeah.
But to them, it's just procrastination.
Right. And I think that part of what that plays into that is that decision paralysis that I think a lot of us feel. And I don't think people understand how real that is sometimes, when it comes to just making simple decisions to like just to either do a task or to get something completed or to just move something forward. What would you say to somebody that struggles with decision paralysis? Because the reason I ask this is because a lot of us with ADHD that are introverts, we struggle with balancing like overstimulation and understimulation and finding like a structure that works for or works with our brains as opposed to against it. And that ends up playing an important role in the decision paralysis that we might, experience on a day-to-day basis. If somebody struggles with that, what would you say to them right now?
If well, I guess let me clear, because you say like we struggle with overstimulation, understimulation,
like finding the balance between the two.
Yeah, it's an interest.
Because
it's a really complicated question.
Yeah, I need you to solve ADHD right now, Justin. Come on.
Yeah. I think one thing that makes it hard is that a lot of people with ADHD, I find, don't necessarily want to give up the impulsivity that they have. Like, it's something that they have with a lot of the time, right? Like, it's nice to get really like hyper fixated on something or overstimulated with something, but then it like has these drastic consequences with like other things that you want to do. Like a really big example that I deal with a lot is like going to bed. Like sitting around for 2 hours to let your brain calm down so that you is not a good value proposition,
right?
And in the short term, right? But you feel it tomorrow. So I don't know. It's very tough. I think a lot of it comes down to just really having a clear sense of like what your motivations are and what like learning how to choose your sacrifices, I think.
Right.
Because in the moment, deciding on if you want to feel calm or if you want to feel overstimulated, feeling this constant draw to shift between these two things, like that's going to be a really difficult thing to navigate because you're never going to get the best of both worlds. And so sort of teaching people to have like a really mature approach to it and really understand that they have to make sacrifices about the things they want in life is a skill that you have to train. Right. This isn't just like some willpower, like, oh, you got to do it type thing. Like, you have to train the ability to make sacrifices for yourself and to choose one thing over the other. So if you're really, struggling between these kind of like these differences and these shifts in stimulation, it makes a lot of sense because in the moment, it's a really hard thing to choose between because neither are really satisfying. Like, as an ADHD person, you want to be fixated or you want to just have your mind finally fucking calm down.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm trying to think if I even have a point to cap off on there. But yeah, I guess like those two things, right? You have to kind of make a choice between them because you'll never be satisfied perfectly with one or the other. And there'll never be a middle ground that satisfies somebody that's been living with ADHD their entire life. Like, your entire life has been defined by moving in polarity between these two things. So like it takes like a long, mature, thoughtful approach of like, I have to sacrifice certain things. I think might be the we try to find an answer on what's a very complicated, great question.
Oh, sure. You work a lot with, and correct me if I'm wrong, you work a lot with motivation theory. How do we redefine like quote motivation when our ADHD brains often, I guess, reject traditional goal setting methods sometimes? How can we redefine motivation for our brains?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always say that there are kind of two versions of motivation. There's
Mhm.
motivation as like an emotion,
Right.
which is what we kind of identify with, is like that feeling to go forward. And then there's kind of the more technical version of motivation, which is that motivation is just an internal calculator that you have that
Mhm.
decides what the most important thing to do is. So the
Right.
easiest way to simplify that, whatever you're doing right now is always the thing you're most motivated to do. And we can manipulate that by getting you to think about certain things, by doing certain things to you. Like we have a calculator that we are feeding information. And that
Mhm.
information can be conscious, it can be unconscious, it can come from
Right.
the environment, it can come from within. So, you know, motivation is both an emotion, but it's also like an internal formula that determines
Mhm.
what you should be doing.
Mhm.
And people with ADHD have a really unique relationship with motivation, but fundamentally their calculator kind of works the same way as everything else. It's just all
Right.
that information that's feeding it, because it's harder to hold on to things, and it's
Mhm.
easier to get like attached to something, and it's easier to get bored of something. So all of the things that are feeding information to our internal like motivation calculator,
Mhm.
that's really difficult if you have ADHD. It's way harder than the
Right.
average person, obviously. So I think I almost forget the main question, but I had a reason to bring that up, that there's like a difference between motivation as like an emotion and motivation as like an internal calculator.
No, that answers the question, because I
Yeah.
was asking how do we redefine motivation for our ADHD brain, because we often will reject like the traditional ways of setting goals and like the methods of setting goals. But I mean that answers. I think that pretty much answers the question of how do our ADHD brains handle motivation and the traditional goals that we set that we're supposed to set, but like our brain kind of reject that ideology sometimes when it comes to setting goals and being motivated.
Yeah, because if I say we have like an internal motivation calculator, and it's like, okay, I'm going to
Mhm.
feed in a goal of like, in 3 months I will get this kind of reward, and I put that into the
Right.
calculator. If I don't have
Mhm.
ADHD, it processes that in one way. If I do have
Right.
ADHD, it's kind of a little less sensitive to that number. It's like I don't really
Yeah.
care about that. Like that doesn't mean as much to me. We lose a little bit of that.
Right.
We lose a little bit of gas mileage when we bring that
Right.
into the
Right.
internal calculator. So
Mhm.
that's why you need extra help, right? That's why people with
Mhm.
ADHD need extra help, is because like
Yeah.
it's harder for this calculator to work in advocacy of like your longer term goals.
Right. Right.
So that's why like there's so much more importance to like longer term goal setting, and like, you know, adjusting the environment around you to like support these kind of goals, because you're at a disadvantage, and it's fucking brutal.
Mhm. Oh,
Brutal
absolutely.
disadvantage to be at when
Mhm.
like your mind just doesn't kind of let you see as far out into the future. For example, like
Right.
time blindness is a huge symptom of
Right.
ADHD.
Right. Oh,
Um,
don't I know it? Don't I
yeah.
know it?
So, you know, the calculator's the same, but the
Yeah.
value of the information going in is different. And so
Right.
the way you approach that information needs to be kind of special,
Right. Right.
which is both like an answer and a non-answer, but you know.
Right. No, I think that's a great answer. Do you think ADHD is overdiagnosed?
Um, it's a really hard question.
I
I
I
think,
I think no. I think that a lot of people are like starting to understand it now more so than ever, because of like the internet has made the world smaller, and so like we're able to
yeah,
share information a lot faster, so a lot of people think, oh, it's like a trend now and everybody's just getting diagnosed and it's being overdiagnosed. But I'm curious what your thoughts are. I think no. I just think people are becoming more aware of what it is exactly, but I'm curious what your
yeah.
thoughts are.
Well, one thing I can tell you for sure is that if we go back to say 2005,
Mhm.
underdiagnosed
Sure.
by a lot,
Hmm.
like especially in adults, really, really
Right.
underdiagnosed.
Right.
The reason why I think it's a little bit more of a complicated question now is because we have especially younger cultures are really interested
Hmm.
in sort of like labels and self-definition.
Right.
And like I was
Hmm.
talking about earlier, attention and motivation are kind of the first things to go with almost any mental health issue,
Hmm.
right? So if you're a young person and you identify with this lack of motivation and this lack of, self-control and this lack of attention, and you're part of a culture that is very interested in quickly diagnosing itself and putting a label on its problems,
Hmm.
you might have symptoms of ADHD, but if you have ADHD is a different question, right? Because a diagnosis is the best explanation for your symptoms. It's not just whether
Right.
you have these symptoms or not.
Right.
So, I think that I would like to believe that it's still no. I still do
Hmm.
think that there's a lot of people that are underdiagnosed. And more importantly, I don't know if I think the consequences of overdiagnosing are such a big issue that we need to engage in this shame culture of like, oh no, you don't have ADHD, you're just pretending. I feel like
Hmm.
that's really fucking harmful.
It is.
So
It very much is. Yeah.
yeah, so I think that it would be really interesting if we had like, this is me being a bit more technical. I don't know if your audience would care about this, but like if we had more sophisticated research that could separate like self-labeling and ADHD symptoms, I think we might find different information than what we got in the past, which is that it is underdiagnosed. But it's an important thing to understand because that bleeds into our cultures that traditionally it is underdiagnosed.
Yes.
And so we have a culture of people that downplay ADHD because they don't understand what it is, because that is how it has been for such a long time. So it might be different today, but for the most part, I just agree with you and say that it is underdiagnosed and it's underappreciated.
Yeah, it's funny because like I'm a late late in life diagnosis. I was diagnosed with ADHD. I'm 37 now. I was diagnosed when I was 34, 35. And it's funny looking back at my life now. And it's funny that you mentioned 2005 because that was the year I graduated from high school. And like I look back at like the struggles that I had during that time frame, and like I think about my diagnosis and now my understanding of what ADHD is and how it affects my life, and like everything makes sense. It's funny how like everything makes sense now. Like all like some of the things that I was struggling with in high school, and college especially, so much of it makes sense. But like where I grew up and the groups that I ran with, like ADHD, well, that wasn't a conversation. Like there was a lot of misconceptions back then, and I mean still to this day, about ADHD. And even from an introversion standpoint, like I didn't truly understand what an introvert was until college, when I preferred to not go out with my friends who were at parties. And I'm like, no, I'm just gonna hang out. And I thought there was something wrong with me. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there, like, introverts don't like people, or ADHD means that it just means that you can't focus on something. But it's a lot, all these things it's a lot deeper. With that being said, Justin, are there any other myths or like our misconceptions that you'd like to see disappear from the ethos when it comes to ADHD or introversion?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. Like, how much time do we have? There's so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, maybe other than a particular myth, I'm gonna, because I think there are a lot of people that do a good job at ADHD myth busting. So I don't know if I feel like I can offer too much unique value there. But what I will say is that I want to offer kind of an opinion on why I think this is such a problem is like, every symptom of ADHD is something that everybody has dealt with. Everybody has felt demotivated. Everybody has had issues controlling themselves. Everybody has had a bit of time. Like, there's no symptom of ADHD, like has that impulsiveness. There's no symptom of ADHD that people don't identify with, right? And so what it creates in the public is this huge tendency to think that they understand it. Because what they do is they look at the ADHD symptom list and they go, okay, I identify with everything on there, so I understand everything about ADHD. And I think it's really good to just redefine what a diagnosis is. Is it something that is the best explanation for those symptoms, not just whether you have them or not? And so, yeah, this, like, everybody has I'm trying not to swear too much. Everybody has an opinion on ADHD. Everybody has an opinion on it. And it's like, nobody has an opinion on bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or antisocial personality. Like, we all have an opinion on ADHD, and I just, I wish there was less of this intensity to think that you're an expert on the disorder, because, like, why aren't you an expert on every other disorder? And it's just because you think that if you looked at that symptom list that, oh, I recognize that stuff, but that's not the situation, right? So the myth that just because you understand the symptoms, it doesn't mean you understand the disorder.
I know we're recording this on a Saturday, but you were just preaching on a Sunday, my friend. That was I cannot agree with you more. The other thing in that regard that I want to pick your brain about is usually whenever I put out content on social media about ADHD and my struggles and a lot of that, one of the things that I get hit back with sometimes is the word self-discipline, right? And how sometimes people will be like, well, it comes down to self-discipline. What is your thought on it? Because I understand it. Like, at the end of the day, like, you're the one making the decisions. You're the one that is controlling your body and the things that you go about to help you with your struggles and all of that. Can you talk about self-discipline and how and what role it plays, and how much of a role it plays in assisting with making things a little bit better for your life.
Well, I guess they're technically not wrong, but just like, how is that useful? Like, if I have a
Right.
limp leg and you go, oh, see, your problem is that you can't run. Well, it's like, yeah, no shit. Right?
Yes.
So like, like self-discipline isn't even really an action, right?
Yeah.
It's just, it's kind of like a description of a bunch of, like, if you're well motivated and you're consistent, like you're disciplined, like you don't go, I'm going to do discipline today, right?
Right.
Discipline is like a summary of like the way that you behave on the whole. So when you say, oh, you struggle with self-discipline, you don't have ADHD, it's like, why are you acting like these, like, if you have ADHD, then self-discipline is harder.
Yes.
Like, why are you acting like these two things aren't working together? I don't understand that. Right? It's just such a weird way of phrasing it to me. So like,
I want to save that clip just so I can play it for people whenever people say that to me. That's very true. That's very true.
So like, I mean, they're right, but like, it's not useful. Like, that doesn't help the person overcome their issues, because there's a reason why self-discipline is so hard for them. And guess what? Like, small theory, ADHD might have something to do with it. It's like, give people credit. Like, give people credit for the unique struggles that they're dealing with.
Right. No, that's. I'm gonna save that. I'm definitely gonna save that clip. Justin, I really appreciate all of your insight here, because like, this is for my audience. Like, I know that a lot of them are going to be listening right now, being like, "Oh yeah, okay, no, that makes sense. That helps," and that really is going to be really beneficial for a lot of us. And just to I have a couple more questions. It's kind of like, wrap all of this up and to put it into a ball here. Number one is, I often hear people say that ADHD is a superpower. I'm curious what your thoughts are on people framing it that way, and whether it actually helps or hurts people that are trying to learn how to manage it on a daily basis.
I think for the most part, it hurts.
I'm with you.
Mm-hmm. Here's the thing. I think that a lot of the time, looking at something as a superpower or a blessing in disguise is kind of a sign that somebody is finally breaking free from like a lifelong relationship with self-stigma, right? Like, if you your whole life have felt like you're inattentive and you're different and you're unsuccessful, then having some sort of sudden burst where you can identify with your ADHD in a positive way might be really helpful for this person's sense of like identity and mood in the short term, right?
Right.
For the most part, though, like, there isn't really an advantage to having ADHD. There might be advantages to the consequences of it. Like, this is the comparison I give a lot, is like, would you ever say, oh, it's good that you're poor? Like, no, like, you never go like, oh, you should have less money, right?
Yes.
But there's no question that people have had a lot of profound experiences from being in poverty.
Yes.
So maybe ADHD is responsible for you and your uniqueness, but like, I'm not going to take away your money, right? Like, that's not something I would ever do for somebody. So,
yes.
Like, man. ADHD might have a relationship with you and your superpowers, but the ADHD itself is not a superpower. You're not like, I'm awesome because I'm poor. Well, it's like, you had experiences in poverty and that led to certain growth for you, but like, you wouldn't wish this upon other people.
Right.
So, you can identify with yourself and your unique journey and your unique identity and look at the role ADHD has within that. But there isn't really an advantage to having ADHD. So I would never look at it as a superpower. And I think it creates an incentive to not want to manage the disorder. Because, people are like, oh, I don't want to take my meds because it makes me uncreative, or I don't want to do this because it suppresses me. Like, often what we're really looking at are late stages of maturity that people are having to pick up later in life, because ADHD made certain types of maturity so hard earlier on. And so I think that looking at it as a superpower is a mistake, because it's encouraging you to neglect the ways that you do have to manage that. Right. Like, I really like what Russell Barkley said, which I'm sure you're familiar with him, where he says that ADHD is like the diabetes of the psychiatric world. You have to manage it every single day to prevent the secondary consequences. I'm a huge fan of that quote, and I agree with it.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, because it's that kind of thinking that helps me explain ADHD to people. Like, I always try to compare, because I always say, I wish we can view mental health the same way that we view physical health, because I think a lot more people would understand what it's like to have these things that we have to manage every day. And usually when I put our mental health struggles into the terms of physical health, and you even did it today a few times, like in regards to like finding a comparison for things that people can actually like see sometimes. It helps people understand how difficult it is to manage these things on a daily basis. And so I really appreciate you saying that. My final question for you is this: there's going to be people that are listening to this right now, adults, which is my main audience, adults mainly between the ages of like 30 and 55, right? That's my typical audience here. For any of them that are listening right now that feel stuck, overwhelmed, unsure where to start, when it comes to managing their life with ADHD while still embracing introversion, if they're feeling that way right now, what is your one message to them that are listening?
Give yourself credit for the fact that it's harder for you than most people. But also look at that as a responsibility you have to yourself to take the situation more seriously. Maybe I think that self-compassion and self-accountability are hand in hand. I don't think they're separate. Like, I don't think you sit there and you give yourself time off or you kick your ass. You never do either of those things separately. You do them together. If you want to hold yourself accountable in a way that is realistic, you have to start by giving yourself credit for how fucking hard your situation is. And if you're somebody who hasn't had help managing these sort of habits, you're like that you've had your entire life, especially into like your adulthood, like it's hard. We live in a world that is ridiculously confusing. There are a million options, a million distractions, a million fidget toys that I saw you spinning. There's like
that's served my life here.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's difficult for you. And I would say that, since we're on the topic of ADHD specifically, like, it's good to look at your disorder as a thing on its own, because the sooner you can control for it and isolate it, the sooner it's easier just to look at life on the whole in a way that isn't, trapped by this ADHD idea.
Right.
So get a hold of your ADHD in a vacuum, but understand that your life has been like, your whole life has been defined by that disorder. So while your life on the whole has been defined by ADHD, you don't really have to. Because once you get ADHD in a box, you can start doing whatever you want.
Right. Right. I love that.
That's how I look at it. Yeah.
That's amazing. Justin, if people want to learn more about you and Solilium and all that, where can they find it?
Yeah. So my website where you can find my coaching and book a consultation with me and stuff would be soliliumcoaching.com. And then I'm on YouTube and Instagram at Solilium Thoughts.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to include links to all of those things in the description of this podcast. And I implore you to go check it out, whether you're here in the United States or in the 51st state, Canada. Yeah, that's no matter where you are. Go check it out. Shout out to all of my I have audience in Canada, and I need to go make it up there one day, so I can say I've been to Canada one time at least. I'll make it up there. Justin, I really do appreciate you, man. Really, thank you for taking time out of your day to spread this insight and knowledge. I got to have you back on because I know there's a lot more that we can talk about, even outside of the ADHD and introversion world, because you specialize in a lot of things. And I know a lot of things that people will benefit from. So I'd love to have you back on.
And that's a wrap on this week's episode of the Vibe with Kai podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you found a little bit of comfort in today's episode, and I hope that you're walking away with a little bit of encouragement, and I hope that you laughed a little bit along the way. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe and leave a review. Let me know what you thought of the episode. I really want to hear your voice. I want to hear your story. I want to hear all about your journey. Let's keep the conversation going. Make sure you follow me on all of your favorite social media platforms. Follow me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it may be, at The Vibe with Kai for more tips, more laughs, and more real talk. Remember, my friends, you are not alone on this journey. We are in this together. And until next time, stay kind to yourself, embrace the journey, and keep vibing. I'll catch you next time. Much love. Good vibes.